Hello and welcome. I'm Matthew Fortier, the Vice President of Policy at the Institute of Corporate Directors.
And I'm Heather Wilson, the Director of Research Services at the Institute.
Thanks for joining us to discuss the results of our latest Director Lens survey of Canada's directors and their sentiments around the impact and implications of COVID-19. So the ICD regularly surveys Canada's directors. We do it a couple of times a year on critical business and political issues. This was a bit of a special survey in that it focused only on the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis that has ensued.
We had a very strong response rate to this survey. As you can see, almost 700 respondents participated, and we had good representation from different sectors, including 40% for-profit, 40% not-for-profit, and 20% Crown government agencies and others. We also had very strong representation from across Canada. And I think, Matthew, you and I were both very pleased to see the response rate. It was very strong. And given everything that's going on around the world and in Canada, both professionally and personally for people, we were very pleased. I think we wanted to start with giving you a big picture of how Canada is responding compared to other parts of the world. So we asked our members if we thought Canada would recover more quickly than other OECD countries. And as you can see, about a third felt that Canada was in a position to recover more quickly. About 40% felt that Canada was in no better position or no worse position to recover. And then about 20% felt that Canada may be in a worse position to recover. We also asked directors to give us their reasons for these responses. Some felt that Canada's strengths were a strong banking system, and the fact that Canada's governments, both provincially, federally, and municipally, had really worked together and collaboratively to find solutions to the COVID-19 crisis were things that people cited as reasons to be optimistic. Some of the challenges they noted were Canada's reliance on trade, especially with trade with the United States, as well as dependence on the resource industries. They felt that that might be a problem for Canada going forward.
Yeah, and it strikes me, Heather, that the response to this is a bit tepid. That said, a third of Canada's board directors feeling like we can do better and are doing better than other developed nations. It's not a bad place to be. So on balance, it's positive, and it shows I think a reasonable level of trust in our government's response, both at the federal but also the provincial and municipal levels. And we know very clearly that some other countries have not fared quite as well.
Absolutely.
So I guess if we move to the next slide, we wanted to know really what what were the issues of concern specifically that directors in Canada have got surrounding COVID-19 and really kind of the aftermath the next few weeks and months and potentially years. The first couple of concerns that are listed on this chart really are what I would call sort of in the moment concerns, bankruptcies and what that will mean for the broader economy. And interestingly, the next concern was around sort of the not-for-profit and charitable sectors with donations drying up. What's the survivability rate in that sector, and what needs to be done to shore up NFPs and charities. If you move down the list, I think you start to get into what I would term sort of mid and long-term concerns. Concern about a recession. Obviously, we're going into one. How long is it going to be? How deep is it going to be? And then of course, higher taxes that will ensue. So to fund the deficit spending that we're experiencing right now to essentially keep Canada's economy on a lifeline, it will necessitate higher taxes, both personal and corporate taxes. That's going to impact, investment and R&D over the coming years. I think most interesting to me, Heather, is number 7 down this list. Canada's directors have really indicated a concern around societal division in Canada as a result of this crisis. So, it's no secret that the people who are most impacted by this from an unemployment perspective are those in the service sector, relatively lower skilled workers. There are many of us who are able to still work from home and draw an income, but there are many who are sort of out of work and stand to be out of work for some time. I think directors are indicating that there's a concern here around a division that may ensue from people who are out of work in the long term and people who are able to work remotely and still be contributive to the economy.
Absolutely, and I think if we look at the answers to the last two questions, where we asked directors to identify whether or not they felt Canada was going to shift to the left or to the right politically, we didn't see a lot of concern there. So the kind of division that we're talking about really is an economic division, I think, probably due to income inequality, other issues, but not the political extremism that we may see in other countries. So that's an interesting part of the survey to note as well.
On the next slide, we've asked directors to give their sense of how Canada's economy will recover and what time frame that they're planning for recovery. The results here are not especially heartening, maybe not very surprising either, though. Most of Canada's directors feel like it'll take well beyond a year and really up to 5 years potentially for the Canadian economy to recover from this crisis, at a significant number saying that it will take between 2 and 5 years. This is particularly concerning if you think about what it will take for our economy to sort of maintain some semblance of productivity. A lot more deficit spending, and that's going to lead to less investment in critical services and education and in infrastructure. These are Canada's competitive advantages globally, and if we're not able to fund them at the rate that we are used to, this might impact and compromise the country's competitive position going forward, and this could have some serious consequences.
Yeah, Matthew, I think that's absolutely right, and there's not a lot of optimism in the results of this. It's really interesting, though, if we move to the next slide, we really see that the directors who responded felt that their organizations were in a much better position to recover more quickly. Over 50% said they thought it would take less than a year for their own organizations to recover. So they are much more optimistic about their ability to recover than the Canadian economy as a whole. And in another interesting note about organizational effectiveness, we also asked them about their crisis response plans. And over 75% said they had a crisis response plan, and over 90% said that response plan was effective during this COVID-19 crisis. So quite an interesting response in organizational confidence in the ability to recover in this pandemic.
Yeah, I found the comments that we received from directors through this survey to be particularly telling around why there's that sort of discrepancy between their confidence in their own organization and the confidence in the Canadian economy. And I think it really does boil down to confidence in knowing their organization and knowing what it will take for their own firm or their own not-for-profit or their own charity to recover. They feel like they've got good information, they've got direct knowledge of their company and of their industry, and therefore are able to make good decisions. I think it's fair to say that they've got less information around the other variables in the broader economy. But so that indicates confidence in their ability to recover, less confidence in the Canadian economy. And I think it's fair to say that it also indicates a confidence in their management teams at this time.
Absolutely, and I think it does indicate that the direct knowledge they have is giving them the confidence they need to make decisions. I think too, it's interesting, there were some challenges that were noted by the people who responded to this survey, including obviously how long this pandemic may actually take, obviously concerns about employee health and safety, whether or not revenue generation will come back in the face of incurred costs, and the inability to gather large groups together for things like fundraisers. So obviously some real challenges. I think we see that one of the comments has to do with trust. And I think all of these comments really are related to issues of trust, whether or not employees, donors, customers will trust organizations and come back to any kind of sense of normality after this is a real question. I think we saw this week the release of the Edelman Trust Barometer, which shows that, in fact, Canadians are more trustful of organizations post-pandemic, at least 10-point rise, which is quite remarkable in only a few months. So I think there's really an ability of organizations to build on that trust and hope to maintain it in the months ahead.
Yeah, and Heather, the trust issue is going to be critical. So, I really think it's going to determine the prognosis for our long-term recovery. And I think it comes down to this, boards that make decisions based on quality information, boards that and companies and organizations that treat stakeholders with respect are more likely to have customers come back and buy from them. They're more likely to have employees who want to work for them and investors who want to invest in them. Look, shortcuts, I think it's natural that there will be many firms who want to take shortcuts to get back into revenue generation and to cut expenses. But I think the downside risk there is, taking shortcuts may, result in a lack of trust, and in the long term, that will impact the success of the firm.
Absolutely. One of the other questions we asked on the survey was about innovations coming out of the pandemic, and we had some interesting responses to that too.
Right. So, I think it's fair to say that there are three buckets that came out here. There was sort of the technology bucket, the process bucket, and the culture bucket. Canada's directors have recognized that this crisis could spur some innovation in Canada. When it comes to technology, they've identified, things like automation and robotics, not necessarily a huge surprise. Virtual meetings that we're all living right now, that is an innovation, and we'll get better at that. Online learning. When it comes to process, interestingly, better data governance, potentially a reduction in governmental red tape, to spur economic activity and innovation. These are things that are identified by directors as possibilities. Hopefully they become real as well.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of culture, we saw things like, well, just the fact that so many people are now working from home is going to be a big change. And whether or not there's more push towards self-reliance, change in individuals' relationship with society because there's more of a focus on public good, and perhaps an evolving definition of what it means to be a good corporate citizen. I think those are all things that we could see. In terms of the final thoughts of the survey, we did ask people to give some of their final thoughts, which you can see here. In terms of my own final thoughts, I would say that there's a lot of room for optimism here, even though it's cautious optimism. I think the fact that directors believe their own organizations could recover within a year is a real sign of optimism. And even though it was a cautious response to the fact that Canada may take as long or better time to recover compared to other countries, I think that was a sign that perhaps Canada is in a better place than perhaps other places in the world.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that in the fog of COVID-19, it is hard to make sense of the issues in front of us and to plan accordingly. I took a lot of heart from this survey because it indicates to me that the people who are, governing Canada's most important institutions are seeing beyond COVID-19. They're seeing beyond that fog. They're seeing innovation. They're seeing a path to recovery. But I also think it's important to note that they're realistic about the challenges ahead of them. They're cautiously optimistic. They see a path, but they know it's going to be challenging.
Absolutely.
So I guess that wraps it up, and I want to thank everybody for watching this. Please check out the full results, and we welcome your insights and your thoughts and your feedback. Thanks very much.
Thank you.